We're just getting this. Trump revealing details of his trade deal with Vietnam. He says Vietnam will pay United States a 20% tariff on any and all goods sent into our territory. He said a 40% tariff on any transshipping. He also said United States of America will have total access to their markets for trade. And Trump says we will be able to sell our products into Vietnam at zero tariff. Look at the markets. Maybe the market turnaround has something to do with that news on trade in Vietnam.
No inflation. Our country is strong. Our interest rate should be 3 points lower. If our interest rate was 3 points lower, that's almost $1 trillion in cost. And it's done just by the signing of a pen. But we have a moron at the head of the Fed. He's a moron.
Speaking of Powell, do you have a top choice?
I do. I have 2 or 3 top choices.
Tell us those.
No. You almost got me there. No.
So we got some interesting economic developments to discuss with you here today, because on one hand, President Trump is currently celebrating a major economic victory after he's just struck a trade deal with one of America's major manufacturing partners, particularly in the Southeast Asia region. And we're talking here about a major rival of China. And so not only is that important in its own right, but this also stands as the second trade deal that has now been renegotiated and finalized under the Liberation Day periods of all the people saying, where are the trade deals? Trump isn't doing anything. The negotiations are fake. Clearly, you're seeing here, right, that is absolutely real. And this is a big development in one direction. But on the other hand, the battle against Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, who has been in strong disagreement with Trump on interest rates and other aspects of the U.S. economy, continues here, as apparently we now have the Freddie Mac manager, right, the FHFA, Federal Housing Authority, yes, correct, abbreviation there, chair, is now calling for an investigation into Jerome Powell after he's apparently under fire here for allegedly lying to Congress. And so that's a pretty interesting phenomenon. And then we also have this jobs report to discuss with you here today, which on the front page does not sound all that great. But when you look into the further details, because a lot of people are immediately using this headline without reading into it, you do see actually some signs of optimism, some signs, and perhaps the hysteria is not necessarily grounded in that regard. And when you look at the fact that the stock market today basically went a little bit up and down, but did not take any huge major crash, there seems to be a little bit of alignment in that regard with investors. And keep in mind, by the way, this is not the official jobs report, which we will find out later about in the coming days here. So with that said, guys, I want to give you all these updates and kind of interconnect some of these themes in today's video, because on one hand, Trump is scoring trade victories. On the other hand, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell continues to be stubborn about it. It would appear that in some ways, because of this back and forth, unfortunately, you have American companies, or perhaps whatever's going on here, we'll read into it, maybe a little skeptical in terms of growth or where to go, which is precisely why, by the way, here, there's a strong case to be made that Jerome Powell ought to be fired. He's actively sabotaging the U.S. economy, or is he even? I don't know, because we also got to discuss what these jobs numbers actually mean in this video. So we'll get into it, though. First, though, folks, do us a big favor here as usual. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. You subscribing here, guys, is not only the best way to support our videos, but it also ensures that you stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And with that said, let us, of course, start here, which is the announcement of the trade deal today. A lot of people are making jokes at my expense here, by the way, because of it, but nonetheless, okay. President Trump has just announced a trade deal with the nation of Vietnam, and here is the following statement, saying here, quote, "It is my great honor," let me actually pull it up on the screen there. "It is my great honor to announce that I have just made a trade deal with the Socialist Republic of Vietnam after speaking with To Lam, the highly respected General Secretary of the Communist Party of Vietnam. It will be a great deal of cooperation between our two countries. The terms are that Vietnam will pay the United States a 20% tariff on any and all goods sent into our territory and a 40% tariff on any trans-shipping," if I'm not mistaken there, basically referring to the phenomenon by which a lot of times Chinese companies, to get around U.S. tariffs, basically send their stuff through Vietnam and other countries, right, kind of do the third-party thing. And so this is also a way to close that loophole that China often abuses. Vietnam here, notably presumably willing to do that. In return, Vietnam will do something they have never done before. And this is big, by the way. This is something I've made a huge point about ever since Liberation Day, ever since bringing up the concept of reciprocal tariffs, which is to give the United States of America total access to their markets for trade. As I've long made the case here, guys, why is it fair in any way that foreign companies get to take advantage of the American consumer, which, by the way, right, is a very lucrative business affair, of course. Americans are the wealthiest people in terms of like average, income and all that stuff on the face of the planet. We have a lot of money. We're a consumer society. We love to spend. And so nations out there like China, like Japan, like Vietnam, what they've done is in many ways, right, basically had their products, their companies, or their business partnerships come into the American market, make a bunch of money, and in a lot of ways send that wealth back home to their own countries. And that's fine, by the way. I'm not against that. I'm not against the very concept here of trade. But why is it that other countries do that to us? Europe, by the way, same situation. And yet when the United States wants to go into a nation like, especially the Asian nations, by the way, they're the most egregious in this regard, like Japan, like China, like Vietnam here, and want to sell into those Asian markets, why do we then go there and face significant trade barriers? Like, that doesn't seem to be actually all that fair and make a whole lot of sense. Their companies can get rich off of our markets, but our companies cannot really get rich off of their markets. Something about that seems a little bit unbalanced, I guess you would say. But Trump here goes on to point out, right? In other words, they will open their market to the United States, meaning that we will be able to sell our market in Vietnam at zero tariff. And that is, of course, a very big development. Zero tariffs, guys, on U.S. goods coming and products and services, presumably coming into the nation of Vietnam. It is my opinion that the SUV, or as is sometimes referred to, large engine vehicle, which does so well in the United States, will be a wonderful addition to the various product lines within Vietnam. Dealing with General Secretary To Lam, which I did personally, was an absolute pleasure. Thank you for your attention to this matter. And look, despite some of the counter signaling I guess I've seen on this trade deal here earlier today, I like to point out, I think that from the MAGA perspective, this is a massive victory because on one hand, you kept the tariffs in place, which is consistent with what kind of Trump's agenda here wants to be. He does want to have some degree of tariffs. He wants to be encouraging, production to take place in the United States, but he also does not want to completely cut off the world to international trade or whatever. And so you kind of meet that balance by basically saying they're right, a 20% tariff. Now, despite all of the fear mongering about how that's going to raise prices on our consumers, it's worth noting that you're talking about the nation of Vietnam here, which is basically where China was about 20 years ago in terms of like economic development, which is to say basically what Vietnam is doing in the modern day is making very cheap goods, essentially in sweatshops, I guess you could say, that are, of course, coming over to America and being sold at ridiculously high markups and premiums, which is basically to say that a 20% tariff on like a $3 product that comes to the US and is being sold for $50, not really something that you're going to notice. It's something that corporations can actually eat. I mean, they might want to raise their product prices if they want to be super greedy, but guess what? In response there, consumers are likely just going to punish them there. And so first of all, on that tariff front, you're keeping something in place. It raises revenue for the government. It encourages domestic production. But it's also, in my opinion, a happy medium, common sense balance there that you want to be reaching. Secondly, also important to note here that despite them both being communists on paper, Vietnam and China are actually geopolitical adversaries. They do not get along. They do not like each other. And so the fact that the U.S. is basically making a deal with Vietnam here, in some ways could maybe say, okay, that will help, I guess, in the process of wanting to decouple from reliance on Chinese supply chains. After all, it's not a total fix, a total solution, I would say, to move your production to one country to another, right? Eventually, you want to see stuff trickle back into the U.S., but as sort of a bridge period there, right? It does make sense, I suppose, in that regard. And lastly, something I want to point out here, right, in terms of the ability, this is very important, by the way, of American companies, specifically American vehicle manufacturers, to be able to go into Vietnam at zero tariffs. That is very significant. Of course, I did see some people earlier today basically mocking Trump for saying, oh, America's going to sell SUVs in Vietnam. Isn't that ridiculous? I mean, after all, look at this video, right? Haven't you seen Vietnam? Don't you know that everyone there basically rides Vespas and motorbikes? apparently not paying attention to the actual cars you do see in this video, right? But as you can see, like this guy says, we're going to sell American SUVs into Vietnam. That is, of course, ridiculous. But, you actually break it down. Literally 8 of the top 10, and this was one Google search, by the way. I was just curious about this. For instance, and there's a point in this I find to be very important. Literally 8 of the top 10 most popular cars that are sold in the nation of Vietnam are all SUVs. As you can see here, what do you see at ranking points number 3 and 6, right? A Ford Territory, which is, guess what, a Ford SUV. And then number 6 of all cars, a Ford Ranger, literally a Ford pickup truck. And it's very important here because I think this is a useful illustration to myth-bust a common idea you constantly hear about American products when Trump brings up this idea of, hey, how come you never see Fords in Berlin or Chevrolet in Tokyo, which is the idea basically that, foreign countries will never buy American cars or American products because they suck, right? There's no demand. They don't want those things, which hence why we need to put high tariffs on American products because they're supposedly so bad that they would never compete in the market anyway, right? Sort of a contradictory logic there to say the least. But I'll tell you this, right? You see that, for instance, in the case of Vietnam, not only are SUVs popular, guess what is American SUV, third most popular car in that country, right? I don't know how these Vietnamese people are even driving these SUVs in like the tiny, cramped, cities there, but whatever, right? And I'll tell you a personal story here too, by the way. I'm currently, so for people who have been wondering, where are you right now? How come the background changed this month? Okay, I'm currently on vacation, all right? I've been on vacation in the EU. I'll be back here very soon. But, I'll tell you a quick story here, right, about Europe. Because this is the nation, this is the continent that is the most notorious for that whole idea. They always say, Europeans will never buy American cars. It is trash. No one wants your Ford. You get here, what car you see very often, all the time, are Ford cars. Okay, now don't get me wrong, all over EU. Okay, don't get me wrong. There's not necessarily the same Fords you see in America. Yeah, newsflash, they don't drive as many F-150s or Mustangs. But in terms of like the hatchbacks, Ford Fusion, Ford Fiesta, Ford Puma, for instance, is a EU exclusive car that is only sold here in this market. Okay, but it is to say, plenty of demand and potential demand, perhaps even unrealized demand for American products in foreign markets. It just simply takes first of all, the willingness or the urge to even try to compete on a fair level. Hence why, again, it is such a victory here that Trump is basically arguing and negotiating for low to zero tariffs on American products in other foreign markets. Because guess what that is? Wealth ultimately for our companies and our nations that is unrealized, untapped potential. And considering we basically have opened our own markets to the whole world, it's only fair. We should be able to go into theirs and guess what? Just fairly compete, okay? We're not saying we were necessarily going to be number one, but if our products supposedly suck, what are you so scared of? Why do you need protectionist policies, right? A very big point to be raised there. Now, with that said, so on one hand, trade deal, very big. Expectedly, you hope to see a lot more coming here soon. But again, big progress there because they've been asking us, where are the trade deals? UK, you already had, by the way, but they're saying, there's no trade deal. So there you go. In a trade deal, not with some tiny random nation that's irrelevant in the grand scheme of the American supply chain, right? It's not, we made a trade deal with Lesotho or Swaziland. No, it is something there that is a major partner. So that is big news to say the least. But on the flip side, you also have the negative side currently of the U.S. economy, largely hinging on the fact that Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell is repeatedly here, refusing to resign from his post. Of course, he has been in some pretty public spats with Trump over the fact that he refuses to lower the interest rates, despite the fact that the so-called tariff inflation that he's been using as an excuse, and now even saying stagflation, the signs of that are yet still nowhere to be found. And today, President Trump just went out and called on Jerome Powell to resign immediately, here saying that if he doesn't, he should be fired for lying to Congress, according to the FHFA, Federal Housing Authority, right, chair there. Moving on here to tell you more about those details. So certainly, right, not the first time that President Trump has called for Jerome Powell to be fired, but it is the first day where U.S. Federal Housing Chair Bill Putte, as you can see here, calls for Congress to investigate Jerome Powell. Apparently something is unfolding here where Powell has been keeping, as you know, the rates artificially high. He's been refusing to cut the rates despite the fact that many other markets, including European nations, etc., have cut rates several times. Powell refuses to do anything. The argument here, of course, that he's been keeping the rates artificially high despite President Trump, noting here that it is doing millions of, guess what, homeowners and buyers a great harm, okay? You want to talk about why, it's been reported widely that the U.S. housing market has been unable to get out of its current slump that it's been in basically since COVID. That's a headline I've seen in the past couple of months here. Gee, you don't say. Maybe it's because basically the entire world is waiting for the interest rates to come down and then people want to buy. And guess what you're doing? Not bringing down the interest rates. Okay, it's ridiculous. But as you can see, FHFA here put out this statement saying U.S. federal housing and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac chairman calls on Congress to investigate Jerome Powell, putting out today that the director of the commission, etc., issued the following statement saying that I am asking Congress to investigate Jerome Powell, his political bias, yes, absolutely, and his deceptive Senate testimony, which is enough to be removed for cause. Jerome Powell's $2.5 billion renovation scandal stinks to high heaven, and he lied about it when asked about the specifics before Congress. This is nothing short of malfeasance and is worthy of for cause, okay? By the way, the story here, if you're wondering what's actually being referred to here, is the fact that apparently, again, the federal chair, Jerome Powell, is being accused of lying to Congress in this scandal where essentially, what it basically is a corruption scandal having to do here with lavish amenities, misleading reports, potentially government waste, abuse of tax dollars. I mean, needless to say, is anyone surprised? Is anyone shocked by any means that is how Jerome Powell is spending tax dollars? Oh, he's corrupt? Oh, gee, you don't say. Nonetheless, here's the story. He's being accused of lying to Congress after he denied that a $2.5 billion, $2.5 billion, guys. Doge, I think, missed one here, by the way. Revamp of the central bank's Washington headquarters will load the facility with lavish amenities, and some are demanding that he be punished. Powell has called the Post exclusive report in April about the bloated renovation project misleading and inaccurate. He's claiming this is not true, but he's saying, oh, there's no VIP dining room, there's no new marble, there are no special elevators. He insisted under questioning from the powerful panel on Wednesday in the Senate, there are no new water features, there's no beehives, and there's no roof terrace garden. So that's what Powell was saying, right? All these reports about the, lavish things happening at this federal building are not founded, they're not substantiated, but of course the current accusation is that he is lying in his Senate testimony, which again would be more than grounds for removal and firing from the post, because Jerome Powell, who is meanwhile facing heat from President Trump, obviously, is directly contradicting in that statement the project's own planning documents, which were signed off by government pen pushers in 2021 under Joe Biden's presidency, obviously, and which have not been revised since. So in other words, he just made it up. The Federal Reserve building is indeed getting the very things that are being accused here, right? The private dining rooms on level 4 will be restored, reads one excerpt from the filing with the National Capital Planning Commission. The governor's private elevator, yes, will be extended to discharge at the dining suite level, indeed. The documents also expressly mention vegetated roof terraces that will welcome urban wildlife and pollinators, as well as new marble and water features. I mean, you can clearly see, right, the types of things that are going on here. And look, I gotta say, I'm not entirely against the idea of making government buildings beautiful. I do think in DC, you kind of want to make a statement there, etc. I think part of the postmodern, like post-World War II style of architecture with government buildings is kind of hideous. Now, that said, isn't it telling the only one in all of DC, the only new federal building being put up that they're actually putting effort into is the Federal Reserve? Yeah, okay, yeah, go figure, right? But anyways, you basically get that situation. Andrew Levin, a professor of economics at Dartmouth College, has urged Congress to step in and punish Powell for lying to lawmakers. Here saying, quote, a top Fed official cannot be permitted to make false statements under oath at a congressional hearing. Such statements must be promptly corrected and in egregious cases subject to censure by the Senate. And so ultimately here, guys, we'll see if anything comes out of this, but it is worth noting this is significant because the pressure to get him to resign basically in the process of this is being ramped up as Senator Cynthia Loomis out of Wyoming a majority member there of the Senate Banking Committee, has told the Post that Powell was clearly not prepared for his testimony and it should be embarrassed. He made a number of factually incorrect statements to the committee regarding the Fed's plush private dining room elevator, skylights, water features, roof terrace, and much, much more. Now, simultaneously, while this, of course, all happens, and while I would argue, by the way, Jerome Powell's decisions by this point are actively kneecapping the U.S. economy, we got to discuss today, at least on the surface, what they're calling the bad news out of Trump's economy, which is this jobs report out of not the federal government, right? Not the official jobs report, but the ADP here, as you can see from CNBC, stating that the private sector lost 33,000 jobs in June, badly missing their expectations for a 100,000 increase, ADP says. Now, that's the surface level story, but when you dig into it, you'll find there's a little bit more to the situation than just this headline, and we'll explain that here in a second. But first, here's something that CNN themselves, CNN of all entities, notes about this supposed new jobs report.
Egan joins me now. Give us some context here on what this report tells us about the economy and what you're seeing.
Well, Sarah, this report paints the picture of a jobs market that is holding up better than feared. Layoff announcements skyrocketed earlier this year, but thankfully they are coming back to earth. So Challenger Gray and Christmas found that in June there were about 48,000 layoff announcements. That is down sharply by 49% from May, and it is even a little bit lower, 2% lower than last June. And when we look at the trend for layoff announcements, they were trending higher and higher earlier this year. This looks back to the beginning of 2024. And you can see they were really low last year, skyrocketed around February and March. In fact, March was about 5 times higher than June. And this, of course, was driven in large part by DOGE, right?
Right. So before you get too hysterical about the supposed jobs numbers, it's worth noting, as CNN points out there, layoffs are actually slowing down, and the reason they were even ticking up in the first place is largely because of the cuts to government jobs, specifically in DOGE. Now, with that said, what exactly is this headline? Well, we're going to explain it to you in full here today, as well as actually show you, even according to their stats, their reports here, some signs that may actually show optimism for the Trump economy, and on top of that, the potential, I'm just speculating here, but when you look at the data here and where the job losses are coming, where the job gains are coming, the actual possibility here that, I don't know, perhaps mass deportations and especially even self-deportations on top of that may be having an impact on these numbers nonetheless. As you can see, here is the headline. Private payrolls, according to ADP, lost 33,000 jobs in June, which is the first decrease since March of 2023. Economists polled by the Dow Jones forecast expected an increase of 100,000 jobs for the month. But here's where it gets interesting, right? Saying here, quote, though layoffs continue to be rare, a hesitancy to hire and a reluctance to replace departing workers led to these job losses last month, according to the ADP. Now, as CNBC themselves points out, to be sure, the ADP, which is constantly being revised, right? It's like revised down, revised, but, Biden especially, he'd come out and would say, amazing jobs report. And then months later, it's revealed, oh, the jobs are basically non-existent, right? That's the ADP we're talking about, right? This very inaccurate metric. Nonetheless, the ADP report has a spotty track record on predicting the subsequent government jobs report, which investors tend to weigh more heavily. May's soft ADP data ended up differing significantly from the monthly jobs reports figures that came in later that week from the federal government. And so keep in mind, as we see this bad headline, it's like, can we even trust the ADP model? But with that in mind, here is what I actually find about this to be a very interesting story, is where the job losses, even according to the ADP, are coming from and where the ADP gains are coming from, because I think this is interesting. So, as you can see here, first and foremost, professional and businesses service, aka the services sector, saw the biggest decline here of 56,000 jobs lost, while health and education saw a net loss of 52,000. Financial activity later then saw a 14,000, much more smaller drop there. So keep that in mind. Service sector is losing a lot of jobs. I think to myself, what kind of people directly and indirectly might work in the service sector that, I don't know, are being affected lately by certain government policies, immigration policies there included? Just an open question there to be asking. Not really sure, right? But on top of that, health and education, okay, these are technically private sector jobs. We also know heavily subsidized by the government, and so cuts could be having some impact there. But here's where it's also interesting, right? This is very, very important. The biggest gains we saw in the U.S. economy, proving here, by the way, the point that Trump's economic approach here is actually working. It's doing what it's intended to do, which is restore these very types of jobs. The contraction was capped by the payroll expansions in goods-producing roles across industries such as manufacturing and mining, aka the manufacturing sector gained a lot of jobs in this past month. Altogether, goods-producing positions grew by 32,000 in the month, while payrolls for service roles overall fell by $66,000. I think this number right here, even if this jobs report ends up not even being super accurate in the end, this number right here is pretty notable and interesting, right? Huge gains in the manufacturing sector, huge losses in the service sector, which, as I said, I wonder what immigration policy lately might be having an impact there. Again, not really sure, just speculating here. It's too much to read too much into one jobs report, especially from the ADP, to really figure out what is going on with the economy. But there you have it. And again, I think one does have to speculate. How much are Jerome Powell's decisions playing potentially into this situation? Anyways, with that said, guys, let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.